Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Halpern, and I'm your host for today's Crew Classé at Home Volume 3. Who are we? Well, my family is one of the oldest wine distributors in Canada. Founded by my late grandfather, our business is now run by my father, Todd Halpern, my uncle, Colin Halpern, and myself, now being the third generation. Today, we have a few special guests joining us. Firstly, our in-house Burgundy nerd, Sheila Flaherty. Sheila, how are you?
Good, thank you.
And next, we have our world-renowned wine critic, Antonio Galloni, joining us from his home in New York City. How are you, Antonio?
How are you?
Good. Thank you again for joining us. So Antonio has founded Vinous Media, which is a leading website for wine reviews and ratings. If you aren't a subscriber yet, I strongly suggest you do so. Join before tomorrow using the discount code Dujac for a 30% discount. Lastly, but not least, I have Jeremy Sess from Domaine, Dujac, and Domaine de Triennes. How are you, Jer?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Doing well. Good evening. So I wanted to start off with a few points. Number one, from the Halpern team, we hope everyone is safe out there. Obviously, these circumstances are quite crazy, and we appreciate you guys taking the time to join us online and hopefully learn a thing or two. Basically, a few weeks ago, my team and I, had this idea of a virtual community. I know around the world now, many other wine agents, wine importers, wineries, writers are doing their own. But we thought to get this going, it was quite easy. Technology transcends borders. And, we often meet in restaurants with friends, family, business partners, what have you. We're able to talk and taste wine. But obviously today, that isn't the case. So we believe with our web series that we have, Crew Classé at Home, you're able to sharpen our skills, sharpen your skills, and gain quite a bit of knowledge. There's two big points that I like to focus on when we do these webinars. One is subjectivity. The idea that wine, I might taste something different than yourself and Antonio and Jeremy and Sheila here. And I know Antonio and I, the last couple of webinars, we've really, spoken about that. And Dwayne alluded to how he, doesn't have that same strategy for drinking wine and pairing with food, but that's the subjectivity of it. And the last piece is the idea of the ungoogleable. We're looking to have topics and conversations that you can't find in a textbook or on a website. These interesting things that you aren't just able to search. So we hope that you guys enjoy our show today. My first question is going to be for Jeremy. Jared, tell us a bit about your history. You were born in Maurice-Saint-Denis, but you spent a considerable amount of time abroad. Do you want to just go into that?
Sure. So yeah, I grew up in Moret. My mom's American. My father's French, originally from Paris. He started the Domaine in '68 and met my mom when she came to work harvest in '71. They got married in '73. I was born a few years later. And then when I was in my late teens and getting near my baccalaureate, my brother Alec was contemplating going to school in England at a boarding school. And I went with him and my parents to visit the schools. And I thought, this is actually a really great idea. And much to his chagrin, I preceded him at the boarding school by a year. And Alec, who was keen to do something different from me, ended up showing up a year later and having everyone ask him, oh, you must be Jeremy's brother. Which really, really bugged him, but I stole his good idea. So I then spent I spent 7 years in England. So I finished high school over there. I did my undergraduate degree. I worked for 2 years for a wine merchant in London, and then I also did a specialization in viticulture in Dijon University. And then I came back in 2000. I came back full time on the Domaine. I've worked, every vintage since '94, but been a full time capacity assisting my father since 2000.
Very cool. I wanted to ask you, Antonio, do you remember when you first met Jeremy, or kind of the first time you tasted the wines?
I probably met Jeremy the first time in New York at like a Palais or something. But I remember my first visit to Dujac because I did something that I'm sure is not normal, because from an Italian family, you take your kids everywhere. And in 2007, one of my best friends from business school got married, and he's French, and that family was very tight with a lot of families in Burgundy. And so I thought it'd be fun to go for a few days to Burgundy to taste. So vintage was 06 at that time. Everybody wanted to taste 05, and I was the only person who wanted to taste 06. So it was the first time I went to Domaine Dujac. It was the first time I went to DRC. It was the first time I went to Domaine Leroy, and it was an incredible trip. But I remember showing up to Domaine Dujac with my son in a stroller. You know, you can do that like in Italy, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, no problem." But in France, you know. So I didn't take him to DRC Leroy, in case you're wondering. But I showed up to Domaine Dujac with my son in a stroller, and it was really fun tasting. And I fell in love with a wine that I still buy every year, which is Malconsor. I tasted this wine from the barrel. I was like, I have to buy this wine. But that was that was my first visit to Domaine Dujac. So that's much more interesting than the first time I met Jeremy, because there's actually a story to it. But it was really it was fun. It was interesting.
I remember that visit very well. I proceeded to, because I met Antonio at that time, but he was still not reviewing Burgundy. And then a few years later, he started reviewing Burgundy, and I was dipping my toes in Piedmont, and I took a trip to Piedmont, and I thought, seeing as Antonio thought it was cool to bring kids to wineries in Italy, and had told me it was fine, I proceeded to take my kids to Roberto Conterno Winery. And of all the wineries in Italy, this is perhaps not the most relaxed. And so he really took it in stride. But when my son Blaise, who was about a year old at the time, started yanking on the valves on the botti of Monfortino, I did notice Roberto get just a little bit more uptight. But anyway, he was very gracious, all in all. We didn't spill any. It was fine. No loss of Monfortino.
Go ahead, Sheila. Sorry.
I just want to jump in. So what does everyone have in their glass? I'm not really sure what was, Antonio, what do you have there with you?
Well, I haven't poured anything yet, but I have Triennes Rosé 09.
Okay, me too.
Then one of my favorite Dujac wines is the Chambolle Grancher from your group, which it's funny because this is to me one of the signature Dujac wines, but I often kick myself for not buying it. And when I taste it, I'm like, why don't I buy that one? Because I have in terms of like building my own cellar, I like to have, I'm asking myself a question, but I like to buy few producers and few wines, but as much as I can of those wines, as opposed to having a bottle of this and a bottle of that, So this is one wine that I don't buy every year. And when I taste it, I'm like, why don't you buy that wine, you idiot? So it's 2014. And this year, I remember because I was in Burgundy that summer, and on a Saturday night, I went to dinner at Ma Cuisine. And first I had a really nice visit in Blagny and Meursault in the day, but you could tell that the sky was a little troubled. I go to dinner at Ma Cuisine. As I'm on my way back, it starts to hail. And then I go back to my hotel and it hails 2 more times. And it was the Saturday before the Musica Van Gala concert. So they moved it. I remember seeing you, Jeremy. They moved it from Clos Vougeot to the church in Rue Saint-Georges. Yeah. That was on Sunday.
Concert, yeah.
Yeah. And then on Monday morning, I had to do what was one of the most difficult experiences I've ever had as a professional in this business, which is I had to go taste wine in the Côte de Beaune. You show up Monday morning at 9 o'clock in Pommard or Volnay to talk to a grower, and I didn't know what to say. I'm like, how are you? No, it's just, and no words are possibly sufficient. And people were so upset. This is where you know that wine is a product of nature. There's only so much you can do. But people were desperate. I remember Henri Boyot telling me his son didn't want to be in the business anymore because it was just too difficult. That's after all these years that had preceded it. So that then in the Côte de Nuit, the vintage turned out to be much better at the end. But so that's my memory of this.
On that note, I know we talked about it briefly yesterday, Jeremy, but can you just explain a little bit what's going on there right now? I mean, how the last little bit's been, and I know some people have probably seen photos of some frost damage and stuff. Has that affected you at all, or?
I've not. I mean, we're shelter in place, so I'm minimizing. I'm minimizing my trips, and we have some vineyards in the Côte de Beaune, but not that many. But so I've relied on the information from friends over there. The Chardonnay has had bud burst, and so there's a little bit of growth on the Chardonnay, so it is vulnerable. And we've gone down to -2 degrees C the last 3-4 nights, and it's just on the cusp. We're pretty sure it's going to be okay. for this wave of cold weather. But and tomorrow morning, actually, we're probably over it now. But we should be okay for this one. There could be cold weather coming back, but the next 2 weeks are pretty good. So I think we've dodged it for this time, at least in the Côte de Nuit and Côte de Beaune. I'm not sure about. I haven't heard any echoes from. I don't see a whole lot of my colleagues these days. So we exchanged texts with a few of them, but that's about it. But they seemed fairly bullish that it was going to be okay for now.
I want to jump in a little bit and talk about Domaine de Triennes. So you purchased that property with the Villain family, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another partner.
And so how did that all come about? I mean,
well, there was a first. Well, there was a first. There was not the first actually, but sorry. There was the real estate pricing had gotten really high in Burgundy in the 80s. Madame Leroy was pursuing. She'd partnered up with her Japanese investors and for Maison Leroy, and they'd given her pretty much a blank check to create Domaine Leroy. And my father had looked at 3 vineyard deals where he'd made good offers and where the last minute she'd swooped in and offered much more than what he'd been able to put towards it. So he'd come to the conclusion that growth in Burgundy was over and no longer possible, and that he should look elsewhere. And this was in 88 was the last one he missed. So he was 48 years old. He still felt like he had plenty of energy and a lot of good years of winemaking ahead of him. And he thought he'd look somewhere else. My father's a pretty entrepreneurial guy, much more than I am, and much more adventurous as well. And he felt ready to take on a new project and new grape varieties and just start something new. And and so he started looking around, and Aubert and Pamela de Villain were good friends. They seemed on board, and they said, oh yeah, well, maybe we could find a place which we could buy. We could spend time in retirement there. Maybe just a bit of vineyards on the side. And then they found a lot of vineyards, no house, and a full-time project essentially, which was much more ambitious than what they'd set out to do. But they loved the place. It's kept them close, and we'd still be close anyway. But I think all the more so. And it's been a really humbling experience because you think you know how to make wine, but it turns out you know how to make Pinot Noir in the Côte de Nuit. And so it was a real challenge. It still remains a challenge, and it's very stimulating and quite fun. But as you noticed, Aubert de Villain has hardly retired, and my father only partially. So I think they thought they'd let go perhaps a bit more easily than they have in practice.
what varietals do you have planted at Triennes? Sorry.
So we have for reds. The ones that were planted originally that we kept, Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah. And because we grafted over a lot of things and we experimented. There was some Carignan, but honestly, it didn't do well. We're too high up and didn't ripen consistently. There was some Cinsault, we replanted a little bit of that goes into the Rosé. There was a lot of Uni Blanc, which we grafted over and then pulled out. So now that we've kept Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah, and we've made quite a lot of Viognier and quite a lot of Chardonnay. Viognier pure and Chardonnay goes into a white blend, the Aurélien Blanc, that I think you have at Halpern. And for the Rosé, mostly Cinsault, young vines of Grenache. We're hoping to make red from Grenache when the vines are older. My father had tried planting some Pinot, but it didn't do he has quite high standards for Pinot Noir, and it wasn't quite up to it. Let's see, am I forgetting something? We've dabbled with a few other things, but it's honestly, it's pretty high up in altitude for the latitude and for the climate. It's really pretty cold with big diurnal shifts, and that's quite limiting in terms of what grape varieties do well there.
In terms of winemaking, is it fundamentally different there versus at Dujac?
Well, the grape varieties are fundamentally different. So you have, with Pinot as a whole, you have a grape variety that's quite sensitive to oxidation, and you tend to practice pretty reductive winemaking. So you keep a lot of lees, you don't give it a ton of air. Although this is changing with warmer vintages, but that would be the general characteristic of Pinot. at the opposite of that, Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah really need a lot of air during the fermentation, during the winemaking. You really, I would say you probably can air them enough, or you can, but you really have to push it to get there. It's not a straightforward thing. You really have to air, to rack, to to move them. Otherwise, they just go into a reduced state and very mercaptan, and they stay stuck there. For rosé, obviously, it's a completely different ballgame from what we're doing in Burgundy. My father did make a bit of rosé, but it was Saignée, and it was in the 2-barrel volume. And we're making quite a lot more Triennes. And for whites, we make a bit of Chardonnay, as I said, so that we're familiar with. But for some of the others, they're more thick-skinned. There's a lot of sunlight, and so you've got to be wary of getting too much phenolic matter and get a little bit bitter. So you have to be careful on that front to minimize skin contact and be quick.
Jeremy, and for Dujac, I know I get asked this question all the time, and I'm sure many people that are watching today have that same question. Do you want to explain the difference between your wines that are Domaine Dujac and Pierre Fille?
Yeah.
I know I get that question all the time, so I thought, why not?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. Domaine Dujac is all estate-grown fruit. So it's either vineyards that we own outright, or that we've leased for a long time being usually 25 years or 18 years, or frequently multiple 9s. But and Dujac Fils et Père is négociant wine. So négociant can go anywhere from purchasing bottles to purchasing fruit and making the wine. We've tried to take it as upstream as possible. So we only purchase fruit for the Dujac Fils et Père wines, and we pick ourselves, sort ourselves, do all the winemaking. So so that was so there's a very, it's some négoce, the parallels between the Domaine and the styles between the Domaine and the négociant wines can be quite different. In Dujac Fils et Père, we're really trying to make the négociant wines a stepping stone towards the Domaine wines, or at least something that we wanted to increase our production a little bit, and so we wanted the wines to really feel the family. Now, we farm organically and biodynamically all of our vineyards. The Dujac Fils et Père wines, I cannot impose. It's too much of a seller's market for fruit in Burgundy. I cannot ask the growers to go organic. I do have 2 of the growers who farm organically, but the others do not. The only thing I've achieved so far is to get them to stop herbicides, but we're not yet full organic with those ones.
And Jared, I know I've been lucky enough, and someone just asked this question, I wanted to bring it up. 17 was a tougher vintage. I was lucky enough to try your 17s twice at a barrel, which were both times better than the next. What do you have to say about that? Alexander from Montreal asked about 17s. What's your view on 17s that you've made?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on where you're coming from. I'm getting old enough that I remember vintages like 94, my first, 04, more recently. And I also remember as a kid, actually the 84s, because I released a handbrake on one of the Domaine cars and during harvest, and create a bit of it's something that got mentioned subsequently in my life. But anyway, it's the notion of tough vintage has changed considerably over time. And in Burgundy, we were a land of very marginal ripeness for a very long time. And more recently, we haven't seen a truly underripe vintage in the last, I don't know, since the 90s would be my feeling. There's been vintages with green aromas, but I don't think that's necessarily due to ripeness. I think that was due to other factors, ladybugs for the case of 2011 or 2004. So 17 was a cooler year. In a way, you could call it more classic because lighter in tannin, lighter in color, and very, very aromatic from the start. But I don't know, it never felt like a tough vintage during harvest. 08 might have felt a little bit tricky in places, but there was no botrytis in 17. So I find it a very, it's a vintage I was very comfortable with in the winemaking. I reproached it initially for lacking a little bit of precision, but as time has gone by through the élevage and then now in bottle, I'm more and more pleased with it. I think the wines have a nice transparency to them, and I'm obviously not an objective party here. I should turn this over to Antonio.
And you haven't had a chance to try the 17s yet from Dujac, have you?
Yeah, so we have a team at Vinous. I'm very thankful to have that team, and most of the Burgundy wines in our publication are covered by Neil Martin. But I go every year still, and I taste a subset of domains that I've covered for forever. And so I haven't tasted the Dujac wines because Neil covers those, but I can tell you that just in general, I mean, it is a vintage of lighter wines. I think it's also a vintage that's less consistent. That is, sort of a perspective from domain to domain. So that's kind of a perspective that you could have only if you've tasted a lot of different wines. And even in the wines that I've tasted, it's there's just more of this, but that's, I think, normal in a vintage like that, like 17s, but it's a lighter style. Some wines are pretty austere, like I just tasted last week, DRC 17. Those wines are lighter in structure, but that doesn't mean that they're really tightly wound. So you wouldn't want to open any of those wines anytime soon. And then others, like, the d'Angervilles that I tasted last week had a little more fleshiness, even though it's Volnay. So that's almost counterintuitive, but the wines had a little bit more suppleness and a little bit more forwardness. So it's a vintage with those are obviously two very high-end domains, but I've tasted some lesser appellations and smaller producers, and it is a vintage just a little bit inconsistent. So, you just have to taste through. And I think these are fun vintages because, you're going to get things that are unexpected. And there's other vintages where sort of the hierarchy of the vineyards is the same, and all the producers kind of stack up as you kind of would expect, more or less. And this is a vintage that's got some curveballs. So I personally find that more interesting because it keeps you on your toes. And as I've said before, Pinot Noir is the hardest region. Burgundy is the hardest region to taste because it demands the most attention. And that's because you're dealing with wines that are very starkly minimalist. One grape, most producers will make their wines kind of in a style that is usually not a lot of variation from the way one producer handles a vintage, like the different wines in their vintage. It tends to be fairly similar. So you're isolating one grape, one person's approach, one's to cooperage, to stems, to all that stuff. And then really what you're left with is the difference of sight. And that's why I love tasting Burgundy wines, because you really have to focus. And if you go to when I used to cover Jeremy's wines, it was, two vintages, because we'd always taste the vintage in the barrel and the vintage in the bottle. And he'd say, hey, you have to set aside X amount of time. And it was always like just what you needed. And that's hard because, you're tasting, how many wines do you make now? 18, 20, something like that?
And 21 for the Domaine plus the Negociant wines.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good guess, isn't it? So about 20 wines times 2 vintages. And it's like, wow, I mean, that is school. As I've said before in your podcast, Adam, this is school. This is like 20 wines and it's isolated, and as I said,
and you have to do that multiple times a day. I find it.
You have to do that multiple times a day. But, so it's a great exercise. And so anyway, when you taste a vintage like 17, you're going to find a little bit more variation is the short answer. But again, I think that these vintages that are fun, they have surprises, and may not be as hyped, but I think that also keeps things in check for the consumer. And there's a beautiful thing to vintages like this, as opposed to vintages that everybody is clamoring for. When my son was born, it was 05. Everybody had to have 05 and nobody cared at all about 06. And, that makes some wines hard to get. So,
yeah, I see it as a bit similar to 2014 for us in terms of style. It shares a number of characteristics. It's denser than 2007. It falls a bit in that family of vintages though. Definitely more approachable in youth, and as a whole, I tell you, I like that style of vintages a lot, because with warmer climate, warmer harvests, earlier harvests every year, if we get these very hot summers like we did in 15, 16, 18, and 19, we make wines that are very dense in terms of tannin also, and the tannins really act as antioxidants. And we have these wines that are very shut down in youth. And let's face it, not all of our customers are buying wine for 30 years from now. So it's nice having vintages that are perhaps just a little bit more gentle in youth, and will have open up earlier, but I still think that the 17s are wines that will age for a happy 25, 30 years if they need to. So.
Well, we're very excited because at the end of this month, we have the release of 2017s in the Ontario market. So we're obviously looking forward to that.
Right.
Jeremy, one thing I love, I'm all over social media. I love to follow a lot of people and see what's doing. I want to hear what your thoughts are on the explosion that happened last year. And I assume you know what I'm saying. Dujac, I think, was the Snapchat.
Many O's. Yeah, it was like 2nd or 3rd of January. So I've done social media mostly for my own amusement as a whole, which is why I'm pretty incompetent. I was incapable of regramming. I never figured it out. The promotion for this webinar that we had. But anyway, so as I post, once a month, more during harvest, but for the rest, I don't post very often. I get a real trickling of followers of maybe 1, 2 a week. And so I woke up this morning and it was just like, you've got 250 new followers. I thought, okay, well, this is different. And this account called Kodak Lens that belongs to a guy called Vinous Santiago. Vinny is DJ Khaled's manager, and he had posted a picture of DJ Khaled and Jay-Z drinking some Chambertin, and he'd hashtagged it Dujac meetings. And this fan account called Ain't No Jigga picked it up and promptly said what they were drinking, and this is clearly an insider because he had a very good idea, and said, Jay gifted DJ Khaled. So all of a sudden, I had this big, this big influx of followers. And let me tell you, till then I had no followers from Palestine. My number of Palestinian followers was 0. And all of a sudden, DJ Khaled, being Palestinian origin, I guess, he had a following over there and the rest. And I posted about wine, and let me tell you, Muslim Castries, it's not our biggest market. And I've raised pigs in the past, and that's also not the biggest draw, I should say, to that audience. But anyway, so I got a much more hip hop driven following on Instagram. And I can't say that I've done anything that would have interested them terribly much, because my life is just not that exciting. But it's been super fun. And so then DJ Khaled followed up with a little live video. He was at the time a Weight Watchers spokesperson, and it was, I have to say, I saved a skit on my phone because it's exciting. It was a person in my life peaked that day. But anyway, so he said, where can I get this wine? So I respond on his post, and he promptly responded. And I happened to be headed to LA, and he invited me over to come by and drop him off some wine. So I don't give away wine for free. This is not in the Burgundian mentality, but I did bring him 1 bottle. And he very sweetly received my cousins and I. We hung out for 15, 20 minutes, and that was that. But anyway, it was kind of a magical moment of social media. How the hell did this happen? When I signed up for the job at Dujac, it was a family thing. I went into it because I like to make wine, and I still do. But I never quite realized how wine was such you don't meet that kind of people, I don't think, if you're selling car parts, or if you're there's a number of other things that you could, or crafts, where you might only meet so many people. But wine has been astonishing in terms of the people who've come to the cellar and whom I've gone to share bottles with over time.
Adam, I think we need Dujac meetings.
Yeah, I like that. We should have stolen that hashtag. I forgot about that one.
It's a good one, actually.
One thing I want to kind of
again, I'm not biased, but I think it's a great one.
I want to jump into just kind of the conversation of whole cluster a little bit, just because we have some people asking about it. We were talking to Guillaume last Saturday, and he de-stems everything. And I was just thinking, you're predominantly, if not 100% whole cluster, correct?
My father was more often than not 100%, although he did de-stem a number of wines over the years. And yeah, we're still predominantly, I average around 85, 90% whole cluster. In the vintages we've had in the past.
Someone just asked this in the thread. I thought it was interesting. Has Dujac increased or decreased the usage of whole cluster as vintages seem to be getting hotter in Burgundy? And has there been any changes in winemaking in Malconsor and Clos de la Roche?
There's some tweaks in winemaking every year, but I'm not coming from a point where I was about to. There's some wineries where the new generation rejects what the previous generation has done, or starts from scratch because they sold everything in bulk or they didn't agree. I love my father's wine, so I was not about to just revolutionize the whole thing. But I did want to tweak things and bring a little bit more attention to detail. So I felt like perhaps our signature, our stylistic signature, was a little too marked, and at the expense where it masked the terroir a little bit. And so I looked, and it's not at all a linear response. And sorry, in terms of the perception of whole cluster. So if you destem just a little bit, you can drop the perception quite a lot while retaining some of what I think I've used advantages, which are very perfumed aromatics and wines that are really expressive and jump out of the glass. So, so with that in mind, I started destemming just a little bit and putting it at the bottom of the tank. And I feel like that can shift things. I don't view whole cluster as being more necessary in cool vintages than in hot vintages. I now tried both circumstances, and I think it works. It can work well in both. On the other hand, I don't think it works well with every terroir out there. I think it works well for Morey, Chambord, Vaune better than it does for Gevrey. Most of our Gevrey is Combat, and it's right. That's essentially Morey. It's really on the cusp there. But if I was making North Gevrey wines, I'd probably destem much more aggressively. I destem the Chambertin more than the other wines. The little bit of Nuit Saint-Georges we buy in, I destem that quite heavily for us. It's a lot of whole cluster for other people. But I see the whole destemmed wines, I think, have wonderful textures, but I think they miss out on some of the aromas they can get, on the excitement that they can be with whole cluster wines. And I think, on the other hand, whole cluster wines, they miss out on some of the textural generosity that you can have in destemmed wines.
Welcome back.
I guess it's the day for technical difficulties.
My difficulties were not so much technical as my lack of punctuality, but otherwise.
A glass of Dujac.
So, Jared, I know and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your Premier Crus and Grand Crus are all 100% new oak. That's right. That's correct, right?
No. I've changed quite a lot on the other hand.
Okay.
So my father used to be 100% on the Grand Cru and a little bit lower on the other wines. And I thought my fights with him would be about destemming, and they turned out to be about new oak. And I think that as the vintages are getting warmer, the warmer the vintage, the harder the oak integration. It's weird because so many people say, oh, the wine can take it. Well, the idea is not to punish the wine, for one. So I don't love that way of phrasing it. But on top of that, I don't know what happens, but in hotter vintages, richer vintages, maybe it's because the wines are more tannic and there's less room for that oak tannin to come and mesh with the rest of the wine. Maybe it's with maybe it's lower malic acid, so that malolactic fermentation, which usually is the moment where you see the oak integrate, is shorter or has been cut back, and so there's less opportunity for the oak to integrate. But the more it goes, the more I'm cutting back on new oak, and I'm going to keep on trending in that direction. So right now, the Grand Crus are a maximum of 75% new oak. The Premier Crus, well, Malconsard is around 70%, but the others are more around the 50% mark, and the Village are around the 20-25%.
Yeah, and I'd say that's a trend in other parts of the world too. I think that people feel that the wines with higher sugars and higher alcohol, they extract a lot if they're too much in oak. And I mean, it's the same thing. I had the same discussion at Petrus with Olivier Berrouet. It's the same exact challenges that people have. And so I think it's interesting to sort of see how, vignerons all over the world are essentially often dealing with the same challenges, and seeing how people respond in different parts of the world, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of alcohol inflation across the world in a lot of wine regions. Burgundy, we haven't seen it so much because we have this substantial buffer of chaptalization, which has completely eroded away now. And so I think we're probably on the cusp of seeing some alcohol inflation in Burgundy, but that will also impact the oak extraction for sure.
I just wanted to touch back on organics quickly. With the Grand, you started with the Grand Crus, correct? Is that true?
We started with the Vaughan vineyards in '01. So in '01 in Vaughan, we just had Echezeaux and we had Beaumont. And so then we would finish because you load up your tractor for one spray or one tank. So anyway, we did roughly a third of the Domaine. So there was a bit of Cru La Roche. So it was Premier Cru and Grand Cru for sure, yeah.
Okay.
Grand Cru is privileged land to grow on. It's less prone to disease. It's less prone to problems in general. So it felt easier to try out organic, which we had at the time no experience, in vineyards which were less prone to disease and had less mildew pressure, less oidium pressure as a whole. So
Just
we
less sensitive overall then.
it's yeah, there's less vigor, and where there's less vigor, there's usually less disease pressure.
And one thing that I know we briefly discussed, you know, for the viewers that aren't aware, we just had a meeting yesterday to make sure our microphones and videos are all working properly, and we, you know, discussed a couple topics. One thing that, you know, Antonio, I want to go back to you with, that we discussed last week with Guillaume, is about wine prices in particular. I don't want to really dive into, oh, why is, you know, Burgundy so expensive, or why are prices inflating? That's not what I'm talking about. But I want you to discuss and mention what you said last week to our viewers about how to approach wine, and whether it's about access, or, you know, you had a great few words on that last week. So I want to see if I can remember.
Accessibility for young, you know, for people that are starting to get into wine, and kind of how do you start getting into Burgundy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of challenges. One problem is harder to solve than the other. One of the big challenges is that because of the escalation of prices of wine, but this is not just Burgundy, this could be Piedmont, it could be Bordeaux, it could be the Rhone for a lot of wines, is that young people are growing up without references. And that would be like saying, I want to study music, but there's no Mozart, there's no Beethoven, there's no Mahler, there's no Brahms. We're saying I want to study literature, and there's no Tolstoy or Dickens or whatever you want. These are reference, you know, these Grand Crus, these Premier Crus, these estates, these are reference points. And when people can't taste the wines, then how does a young sommelier or a young writer or a young professional know what 89 Aubryon is like, or know what 90 DRC Richebourg is like? So one problem is that that a lot of the classics, if you will, are very hard to access, and therefore people are growing up without that background, and that's why there's explosion of interest in the wines of Jura or the Loire or southern Italy or parts of Spain or parts of the United States, because those are wines that, you know, people can afford. So that's a harder challenge, but sort of a step to getting there is sort of, to me, I mean, Guillaume's insight on this was, you know, drink the least expensive wine from the top estates, which is always a good strategy. That's a good strategy everywhere. You know, it could be Bourgogne Blanc in Burgundy or red. It could be Dolcetto in Piedmont or whatever, Chianti Classico in Tuscany. So that's one idea. So you look for really high quality estates and buy the village wine. There was a question here. Somebody asked about Roumier. You know, you know, the village Roumier wine is delicious. You know, so maybe you can't have Musigny or Bon Mar. I mean, who can, unless you're a billionaire or a friend? But I'm neither. So it's, you know, often the village wine, no problem. So that's one idea. The other is, you know, tasting groups and you know, getting together with your friends and doing thematic tastings. Now, obviously, in this current world that we're in right now, that's obviously a little bit of a challenge in terms of physically dividing a bottle, but, you know, hopefully in a few months we'll be back to normal, and you can get together with a tasting group and divide the cost of some wines and educate yourself that way. And then, to me, in Burgundy, what I really love most is, sure, I love tasting wines like this, but the domains that I cover now are mostly little domains in little villages like Marange or whatever, which are now making really good wine. And part of it has to do with climate change. Part of it has to do with the younger generation of more enlightened vigneron and just greater knowledge and skill. And there's some really beautiful wines that come out of these lesser known villages. They're not going to be 30-year wines, and they're not going to be collectible wines necessarily, but you know what? You can buy 6 bottles of those wines, and you can put them away, and you can open one on a Monday night without wondering what you paid for it. And there's a beauty to that. There's a beauty to just being able to open, you know, a wine without the ceremony of it, and just enjoying it for the pleasure of it. I had this discussion a couple of weeks ago with Bertrand de Villaine. I told him that, that I like to use DRC wines for charity events because that way they're going to greater good, and that, many people can enjoy them, and there's some benefit to like opening those wines. And he's like, we should just open those wines and drink them for yourself. And I'm like, well, you can do that, but for me, it's a little bit more problematic. So there's a beauty to just being able to just go into your basement, your cellar, and this is the last point, which is people don't have really cellars anymore, but there's a beauty to just going to your wine fridge or to your basement or wherever, just opening a bottle without thinking about what it cost or what it might have cost 5 years ago and is worth now. So these are the points. You stick with entry-level wines of top domains, put together a tasting group, and look for wines from lesser-known villages where there are people making beautiful wines. And I have the privilege of being able to go, and I don't taste the Dujac wines consistently like I used to, but there's a number of domains that I get to visit every year and taste. But I love the little guys and gals in the little villages, that nobody goes to. I mean, I love tasting those wines because such a nice surprise to come across a white wine or a red wine that you could actually afford, that's delicious, that you could have with your dinner. And as I said, that you can buy in some meaningful quantity. this is not maybe a problem for this conversation, but I hate these California wines with like one bottle allocation. It's like, what are you going to do with one bottle of something? And that's just like, unless it's Musigny from Roumier, there's a barrel and a half. So one bottle is like a big percentage of the production. But seriously, one bottle of something is not enough to really learn or to get anything out of it except for one moment. So I think it's great to have the ability to buy 3 or 6 bottles of something. And so those are my 3 tips. Anyway, I'm talking too much, Adam, but I'm Italian. Got to use my hands.
And Jared, what do you think? Obviously, Domaine de Triennes is a great, other avenue to see your winemaking. And go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but it bears very little in common with what we do in Burgundy. We've tried at Triennes, and I want to promote Triennes, but what we do at Triennes, we do bring a few things, which is we're looking for freshness, we're looking for drinkability, we're looking to make wines that are very friendly with food, and it's, I think the wines are properly old world and properly French in style, but we're not trying to replicate what we do in Burgundy, where we destem 100%, we're doing different varieties and so on. So you can't transpose it. It's not like not too far from Triennes, Latour started in the Ardèche, they're an operation, and they make Chardonnay and Pinot in the Ardèche. And that is definitely intended to bring people towards their Burgundy and to bridge that gap. I agree with much of what Antonio has said. I think the import filter primarily makes for a view of Burgundy which is very focused, and also, there's echo chambers, but everyone is very much focused on the top domains. You hear the same names recurrent. You sometimes forget that in a village like Gevrey-Chambertin, there's 60 odd growers, I think, 60 different domains. There's not just Rousseau, Bachelet, Mortet, and Roti, and a few others. It's much wider than that. Moret-Saint-Denis has 35 different wineries and growers operating in Moret, and so on. There's 3,500 wineries in the Côte d'Or, I believe. So it's this huge number, and granted, not all those domains make exciting wines or wines that are even thrilling or truly representative of the best of their terroir. But there's a lot more Burgundy out there than people realize, and the pricing the pricing as you move down does drop substantially, because when you're looking for Roumier, well, there's so many people fighting even for the village that the village is now the price of some. Well, actually, if you're looking at the focus, there's fashions as well. A barrel of Chambord Village costs more in bulk than a barrel of Moret-Saint-Denis Premier Cru or of Nuit-Saint-Georges Premier Cru. So if you're looking outside of the main villages, and it doesn't take, the prices really drop very, very substantially.
Well, I'm a huge fan. I know the sorting table in the United States had Triennes prior to us taking it on here in Ontario and Canada. I'm a big follower. I've seen the brand grow and what you've been able to do. I see a question here, who is drinking the rosé? Interested in your thoughts and the style. Jeremy, you want to discuss the style? And obviously, I don't have the rosé. I'm lucky enough to be drinking a little baby over here. But
Same.
What is
but
that?
I just found it somewhere. But I want to know, Antonio and Sheila and Jeremy, I guess we'll start with you about the about your rosé, and obviously the other two wines that some of our viewers might have.
So, you know, the main qualities of rosé for me are that if you put it on a table, people will finish that bottle and say, "No way, we've already finished this." That's about the highest praise I feel I can hear or receive from that.
It's very dangerous that way.
Exactly. Good rosé is slightly dangerous that way. And you know, it's still a measured risk, but nonetheless, I think that as a result, what we're trying to do is a wine of not too much. It's important, you know, where for red people, we talk about concentration, we talk about weight, full body. For rosé, it's got to be light. It's got to be very aromatic because usually it's sitting in an ice bucket, and you want the aromas to continue to please and engage. And you want something that that is really balanced. It has to have acidity because it's supposed to be fresh, but not too much. It's got to have aromas, but at the same time not be cloying or be fatiguing to the palate. And there's a brand of rosé called Summer Water, which I think is a really great name for something like that. But I think that's really evocative. I think it's a really great name because it's really evocative of that feeling of outdoorsiness, sunshine, because it's got, while it's getting drunk more and more year round, nonetheless, it is still powerfully associated with terraces, swimming pools, the beach, the Mediterranean, and that sort of thing. And it goes well with outdoors summer food as well. So we try to make something that is very crisp, very light, not too much alcohol, not too much of anything, and make a wine that's just chuggable.
Jeremy,
we have
2019, can I ask a question? I'm just curious.
No, I was probably going to ask.
2019 strikes me as having a little bit more fat than is often the case. Is that just the vintage, or did you make it that way?
It is the vintage. It was a very hot, dry summer. And so where we were trying to avoid too much concentration, in 19 we have a bit more than normal. So it's a little bit rounder, it's a little bit more rich in glycerol. We have to be really cautious in our selection of lots to keep the wine. We always want it to be more closer to 12 than to 13. And in 19, it's a little bit higher than usual. It's closer to 13, I think, if I remember correctly.
Well, on the topic of rosé, we are in Ontario releasing via consignment in 2 weeks. It'll be arriving, and then there's a much larger release happening in the LCBO stores. So if you are in Ontario and you are looking to purchase it, obviously you can reach out to us. That's just, I wanted to quickly jump in with that.
Well, one of my favorite things too in this market, I mean, it comes in under 20, and we've seen the price of Provence rosés climb so much as of late. So for me, it still hits at an amazing price point for us, which is awesome.
It's been the growth of rosé. It's been the most rapidly growing wine category for France for a decade now, and the competition's gotten pretty fierce with big players like Miraval, Minuti, Whispering Angel, really taking up a lot of the volume and fighting for supply. So it's been hard to hold that price. In the U.S., the tariffs have been difficult to weather as well.
Yeah, it must, you know, I've seen the prices of rosé escalate rapidly. Whispering Angel being in our market has gone up year over year. So how are you guys really keeping that price so stable? It's unbelievable, you know, for $20.
Our margin is going like this. But yeah, no, essentially, I think it's very important to hold price, and we're making it up somewhat with the volume, but because we have grown the production substantially, but nonetheless, I think it's a rosé. As I don't know, personally as a consumer, I find that past a certain price, I just change. I find another rosé. When I've been at trade tastings for rosé, I find that the price actually doesn't have a very clear correlation with, and this is true of all wine categories, but perhaps more so for rosé. The price doesn't correlate to the quality very closely at all. So there's good examples in all manners of price points, and also note that some of Whispering Angel, Minuti, Miraval, those are all Côte de Provence, and we are IGP, which means that we're not in that pool fighting for the same wines as them, and we've found good quality supply and for grapes, for wine in the IGP world, and that's been helpful in keeping the price a little more modest.
And of course, I must mention the 2019 Triennes Rosé is currently available across the United States. So if you are a viewer from the United States, probably head to your local liquor store, safely, of course, and pick it up. Sorry, Jer?
So no, I was just like, head to your liquor store. Are you allowed to do that? In France, it's considered primary necessities, so we're allowed to actually, but we
are
have
here.
to find a way.
It is in the US also.
It's the same in New York right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about while we have time is the whites as well. You make a Bourgogne Blanc that stays in France?
Yeah, we make between 2 and 4 barrels depending on the size of the vintage. It's it's an industrial size production. It's actually smaller than the Grancher that Antonio is currently drinking, which we make 3 to 5 barrels of. That's why you don't see a lot of it going around. It's because it's mostly sold out the door to a few local restaurants. And a few
where does the fruit come from it? Or for
it? It's in the lower part of Marais.
Yeah. And then in terms of the other whites, I mean, I've been fortunate to try the Foletière before, and you make a Montluçon as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Aligoté?
No, the historical producer of Montluçon is Ponceau, and Domaine Ponceau has aligotés that were planted before the appellations, the AOCs, now AOPs, were defined. And so as the AOPs picked up what was in place already, they're allowed to keep aligoté. But so theirs were planted, I believe, in 1905. We planted in 2000, so we had to plant Chardonnay, and it was Pinot before that. So our Montluçon is pure Chardonnay.
And so it's the 3 whites. Am I missing?
So we also have Puligny Premier Cru Les Combettes since 2014, at the same time as the Foletière. Very old vines in the Combette, and younger vines in the Foletière. So the Combette is considerably denser, and it's also the Meursault end of Puligny. So there's much more breadth and richness to it. And Foletière is, I think, less tightly knit, not quite as textural, and a bit more open and floral. And Montluçon is much higher acid because it's a much cooler site.
And can you speak to the élevage on the whites a little bit?
So the whites, we crush them as they go into the press to get a little bit more texture, a little bit more tannin. Then I aggressively air them out as must before we add any sulfur to kind of pre-stress them, because premature oxidation is a big conversation, not for white Burgundy consumers, but also within white Burgundy producers. And we all ambition to make wine that really can last in time. So that's one of the answers we found, is to expose the wines to a lot of air prior to going into bottle. So, and then they ferment in barrel. I use very little new oak. I use between 10 and 15% new oak for the Premier Crus, and just under, I replace 1 barrel a year for the Marais Village, and only older barrels for my 3 barrels of Bourgogne, the big year. And then we keep them on their lees for the first year, very little batonnage. I let them get quite oxidative at that stage. They can really go towards that. John Consgard talks about the death and resurrection for Chardonnay, and we do a little bit of that. I don't push it as far as he does, but essentially I let them go quite far post-mallow in terms of giving them some air. And then after we sulfur, we bring them back towards a more reductive state. So they finish about 11 months in barrel, and then after that we go into stainless steel tank for about 6 months, where we're going to bottle the 2018s. We think, in about 2 weeks' time. So it's so that time in tank really helps tighten them back up, and they freshen back up considerably. They precipitate a lot of their reactive, easily oxidized compounds, and I think that our track record, not that many people have old vintages of white Dujac, but we do, and I think our track record for oxidation is pretty good so far.
That's very cool. Speaking of bottling, there was an Instagram video I think you or Diana posted not too long ago of the kids.
She was labeling this.
In installation.
They were not bottling. They were they were getting some of the half bottles out of the cellar and washing them so we could stick labels on them
It
and
was
bring
very
them home
sweet of you.
because we knew we were going to be down here for a long time, and we better have a few halves, although there's been considerable inflation in what we're opening at this stage.
I know they're young, but do they show interest in terms of, you know, being able to smell wine and kind of be in that world?
So my son Aubert is kind of the creative big ideas kid, and he gets a little distracted in the winery. He wants to reinvent things first and then see how things operate. Blaise is very much the kind of kid he's mercifully not done that one, but you can find him taking things apart, not putting them back together, but taking them apart so he can understand how they work. So I think he's got the heart of an engineer, and he's very curious about the process of wine. And to be honest, he really gets it. He's really, in the winery, he comes and lends a hand every now and then, and he's really does the tasks we give him very well. And no, I love having him in the winery. He loves tasting as well. Both of them enjoy tasting. And so yeah, no, I'm pleased. I'm not going to try forcing him into it. My father didn't force me, and I think it was better that way. But we'll see. In
terms of family as well, I mean, Diana is obviously an extremely respected winemaker, and just want to talk about
Jeremy's wife, Diana, for those that don't know.
Yeah, sorry.
I just want to talk about Snowden. Are you involved in that property at all in California, or
would you get involved in your in-laws' business? Perhaps. I don't know. I decided not to. No, Diana got involved in her in-laws' business very successfully and very well. I knew that, for one, Cabernet is not my true field of expertise. Diana talks to me a lot about what she's doing at Snowden, but I'm not involved in any other than supportive fellow winemaker husband. I'm not involved particularly. I do drink it.
It's delicious.
Exactly.
And Antonio, have you had the chance to score or rate or taste any of the Snowden wines? I'm not sure if we had that conversation.
I mean, I taste with Diana every year, you know.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be tough, you know, the time away from family and the harvest. I mean, the harvest is, you know, sometimes it changes. There's vintages where, you know, the timing is kind of, you know, you don't really know until the last minute what you're going to do, and it's I'm sure not at all an easy thing. But yeah, I taste those wines every year, and well, you know, you can go and read what I think, but I mean, it's definitely a style of more sort of old school leaning style of Cabernet, and yeah, I've enjoyed the wines quite a bit.
I see in the Q&A section, Wilson asked the question, and I guess I'm going to throw this one to you, Jeremy. What do you think, what is the impact that you're seeing on the warmer climate change in Burgundy? What impact is that on your winemaking, your planning in the vineyards and such?
We're picking riper. We've got wines that extract much faster and much more easily. So a lot more tannin right from the start, even as must. So where we used to have to extract fairly aggressively in the winery, we're now, on the contrary, we've got our foot on the brake to try to slow down the extraction to give time for the fermentation to happen, for things to develop. So it's more pump overs, fewer punch downs, essentially shorter maceration times. I think we're going to see the importance of temperature control in a lot of the wineries and cellars and buildings. We need to be able to cool that fruit down when it comes in, and right now we're under capacity on that front. We're building a new winery with that in mind. And then at this time of year is probably the greatest danger. We're seeing, I don't know, I had not seen big frost in a long, long time. And it used to be very, very local. We had a bit in 98, we had a bit in 85. And it was usually the lower vineyards or where there were frost pockets would sit and that sort of thing. There, it's everywhere on the coast. It goes from Bourgogne to Grand Cru. And we're seeing these kind of these warm winters followed by cold springs or cold spells during spring. And I read recently about how that happens. There's this polar vortex that disappears in the spring and that throws cold weather in various regions of the northern hemisphere. And depending on how fast it fades. And I guess we're going to see more and more of that. So I think frost is going to become the big issue of the decades, a big challenge of the decades ahead. Right now, the only protection we have against frost is really to heat things up. We're not equipped for aspersion the way they are in Chablis. So, and it's not really cold enough for that. So right now, you probably saw, or a number of your viewers, our viewers today saw the images of the Côte de Beaune with smudge buckets, essentially that they're lighting up. So our problem comes from global warming, and we're heating things up further. So it doesn't feel like an elegant solution to a problem. It feels like a temporary fix, but we're going to have to find something more elegant than that as a solution over time.
Yeah, I mean, what Jeremy's talking about is not so much climate change. I mean, global warming, but climate change, just inversion of seasons almost. It's really weird. And in the warm years, from a consumer standpoint, if you're just thinking about wine, not winemaking, but what's in your glass, one of the things that happens in warm vintages, in my view anyways, that the differences between vineyards become less clear. Mm-hmm. And so you get like a photograph that's like slightly out of focus. And sure, you can taste the vineyard, but it's not quite as sharp as you get in a more, I hate the word classic, but not a vintage with excessive heat. And then conversely, those vintages are actually really good for entry-level wines, so like as a consumer, like a vintage like 15, like the village wines are just outstandingly delicious. They may not be the most complex or intellectual wines, or they may not necessarily be the most nuanced wines, but if I just said, hey, I'm in a restaurant and I want to drink a delicious bottle of Burgundy, a lot of those village wines in a vintage like that are just dynamitely delicious and beautiful. And again, but that's kind of the Mother Nature's a balance and equilibrium. And as soon as if you displace something on one end, you have to counter it on the other side. So it's, I think, a really interesting conversation to see where things go. If people forget that in the 80s and 90s, in Burgundy tried to make really big, powerful, concentrated wines, and the clonal material that was planted was for early ripening, to make early ripening big wines. I mean, the person who told me that was Freddie Mounier. And the current, the climate now sort of makes you rethink all of these decisions that were made 20 or 30 years ago in terms of planting and clonal selections. And, the nature of, people ask me, have I ever made a wine? I haven't. The reason why is because you get one shot a year. And I don't like those odds very much, but that's what you're dealing with when you make wine. But those decisions about what you planted, those are like 20 and 30 year decisions, because you only see the end result after a long time. So it's, this is like a multi-generational question. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
One of the big things that I hear a lot of people talking about too is just with climate is extremes. It's like everything seems to be more extreme. If there's rain, there's more rain. If there's hail, there's more hail. If there's frost, there's more frost. It's not small bits of anything anymore.
Now, every year we hear a new record's been beaten for warmest years since the records were started, wettest January, et cetera. Yeah, that's absolutely, we're seeing very extreme weather. We're seeing more violent incidents of weather, and with the storms are bigger because there's just more energy in the atmosphere. There's just more sun getting through, higher temperatures, more differences in temperature as well. So that just makes for taller and taller clouds and more violent clouds.
And I know, Antonio, your job is to, taste and compare wineries and wines and rate and review. Jeremy, from your point of view, do you often go taste many of, your fellow winemakers in Burgundy to just check on styles? Because for some people that may not know in this, there's more than one person that makes Clos de la Roche. There's more than one person that makes Classé, and et cetera. So how do you use that as a practice or a tool, or?
Yeah, we have grower meetings in Moheim. We taste in each other's cellars every now and then. I have a group of contemporaries or friends that I taste with very regularly. Domaine Dujac is part of a group called Domaine familiaux de Bourgogne, so the family domains of Burgundy, and we're one of 28 in that. And every year we hold 2 tastings for the public, but we take the chance as well to taste each other's wines, and then and this is for only French public, but then we also have tastings within the group. So normally in June, I'm not sure if we'll be able to this year, we try the new vintage. Everyone would bring one wine, and we try each other's wines. It's very useful to have exchanges with colleagues and get to see what's going on, because my view of a vintage might be very different from one of my colleagues' view of the vintage. We all have our events and our perception, and it's good to be challenged on that regularly.
And in the early 2000s, you and a good friend, good mutual friend of ours, Etienne de Monti, you guys, if I'm not mistaken, purchased a nice little some new vineyards. What impact has that had on Dujac and such?
It was a wonderful thing to have worked on, and to have done. So we picked up the Malconsort, a tiny bit of more Bonnemar, some Beaumont that substantially tripled our size in Beaumont, and the tiny pieces of Chambertin and Romanée-Saint-Vivant. It was less big for us in terms of a surface area than it was for Etienne, but he found the deal, and we worked together very well. I think it's funny because we were already blessed with having quite a few Grand Crus, but people's perception of the Domaine really changed, because even if they haven't tasted, if you have Chambertin or you have Romanée-Saint-Vivant, you've got one of the real pearls or gems of the Burgundy crown, and that really draws attention. And bizarrely, that changes people's attention. You're still making Clos d'Arrache. I don't think our Clos d'Arrache is better because we make Romanée-Saint-Vivant or Chambertin. I think anyway. It's so it has changed perception. And then I've got to say, from a personal satisfaction standpoint, it's wonderful to get the chance to. It's very exciting to get to try to make wine from new places. I mean, Malconsort is a pretty swanky neighborhood. You get to make wines from that altitude curve and strip of land, and you're right next to Attache. It's magical. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it's quite cool to see. So just in closing, I just wanted to mention a few things. And Antonio, you guys have any questions before I close this out? Or I have a bunch of things to mention, of course, for our viewers, but anything, Antonio?
I'll answer these two questions that were directed towards me, if you don't mind. The
Please do.
first was if the rosé is going to be available for sale on Delectable, and it sure will. We have got great retailers on that platform, so as soon as it's released, it'll get on there. Then somebody asked me what my favorite Dujac wines were, and I thought I would answer that because my favorite is not the conventional favorite. We're going to exclude the Chambertin and the Romanée-Saint-Vivant because you have to be very lucky to find those. But I love Bonnemar. And, Clos de la Roche is obviously the iconic wine. Neil Martin just published a vertical on Clos Saint-Denis. But if I think about wines and how they age over time, the wine that I like the most and that I try to buy whenever I can is the Bonnemar. And then Malconsort, I mean, Jeremy knows the first time I tasted that wine, I loved it. So that on the Premier Cru level. But of the top wines, for me, Bonnemar is special. And it's not a wine that most people associate with Domaine Dujac as the others. So I thought I would share that.
Thank you. Well, just running back into my closing remarks. Number one is the rosé, Domaine de Triennes rosé, is available now in the U.S. And as Antonio said, you'll be able to find it with the retailers using the Delectable app. Before I close, Antonio, just briefly tell us about Delectable, because I know I'm an avid user of it, but for those that don't know about it, they definitely should.
Well, I mean, I think it's so Delectable is like an Instagram for wine. You take a picture of a label and then you can keep your note, you take your notes on it. And it's really the only, it's the best app for image recognition and being able to keep track of the wines that you've tasted. So it's super fast now for both iOS and Android. So basically that's what you do. You take a picture of this wine, record your note, and then if you want to buy it, we list all the retailers where that's available within your shipping area. So it's very seamless. And as we are in this increasingly technology-driven and delivery-driven sort of mode, and my own impression, although you didn't ask me, is that we're going to remain in this mode for quite some time, even after we come out of this pandemic. I think Delectable is great for retailers who want to have a customer acquisition tool. We're going to let wineries put their shops on there very soon, and it's great for consumers, obviously, to talk about wines with their friends because there's a social media component to it, of course. And it's a great app for being able to find those wines from high quality merchants. So if you look at the merchants that we have out there, they're in the US right now, but it's really like la creme de la creme of people who sell really beautiful artisan handmade wines that are the kinds of wines that our readers love. So
thank you for explaining that. And once again, if you go to Vinous Media and you'd like to subscribe, make sure to use the code Dujac to get 30% off today. A few other things, of course, Domaine de Triennes, once again, Rosé in Ontario will be released in 2 weeks via consignment, and also in vintages in the LCBO in May of this year. If you want to visit helpernwine.com, you're able to purchase Snowden wines, you're able to purchase Domaine de Triennes, Les Aurélien Blanc and Rouge right now, and soon, obviously, the Rosé. April 23rd is the lottery for Domaine Dujac, along with, I believe that takes a week. So please make sure you visit that. Hopefully everyone's lucky enough to get some. At the end of this, you're going to see a screen pop up with a Google form. Feel free to fill that out if you'd like. We're looking to collect information so we can make sure that we improve our webinars. And I hope, each one that we've read so far, we've done something to get better, such as the waiting screen before you're just looking at my face or a bottle of wine. Now we have a proper template. So once again,
Very pro now.
I would like to mention Wednesday, April 8th, we have at 8 p.m. We have the Duncan family from Silver Oak, along with the head winemaker, Nate Weiss, will be joining us with Ken Fredrickson, a master sommelier. And then on April 11th, we're welcoming back Antonio Galloni, as well as the president of Antinori, Renzo Cottarello. So I hope everyone joins us. You can pre-register now. We're going to make sure we have the links on social media so you can take a look. Helper Wine right now, if you visit our website, we're offering free contactless delivery to your doorstep, free in the GTA. And of course, we deliver outside the GTA. Please make sure to be safe. Please make sure to practice social distancing. I hope that might be your bright spot of the day, whatever it is. Please come back. Please join us. We hope you've learned something. Jeremy, Antonio, Sheila, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you guys are safe and sound. I really look forward to all of us getting together, hopefully sometime soon, because I'm ready to break out of this cage myself.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Sheila.
Jeremy, have a good evening, and everyone else, have a good day. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you guys next week.
Cheers.
Thanks.